Alright, so this week I've got a really cool trick for creating a lens flare brush using the actual lens flare filter here inside Photoshop. So here I have an image that I want to enhance the flashes on the camera here. Now, obviously, on this particular stock image, they've added the flashes in here to it and make them a little bit more dramatic, but I want them even more dramatic than that. So, I'm going to go ahead and create a new blank layer and fill it with black here on the image. I'm going to go ahead and press Shift-Delete. And we'll go ahead and choose black and normal, 100%. Click OK. So on that, we're going to go under Filter and go to Render and choose Lens Flare. Now, you have multiple choices when it comes to generating a lens flare. You have the various lens types here. And usually the standard is the 50 to 300. You can just click through and see that each one of them has very different properties. And the one I like in this case is this one called Movie Prime. And if you can actually grab the target here in the middle and just kind of move this around and see how that lens flare behaves. But I'm just going to kind of put it pretty much right in the center here. Just about like that. And if you want to increase the brightness, you can certainly go ahead and do that. But I'm going to go ahead and leave it at 100%. I will click OK. So there is my flare. Now, I want to be able to turn this into a brush because I could, obviously go ahead and change the blend mode here to screen, and then that would allow me to go ahead and blend it in the image, but I want to define this as a brush so I can pretty much put it anywhere I want in multiple places without having to make duplicate layers over and over. So I'm going to first go ahead and take out the color information. I don't need it to be in color, so we'll go under Image Adjustments and choose Desaturate. And I'm going to go ahead and, well, actually, no, let's go ahead and take care of these edges. You can see these flares on the ends go all the way to the edge of the document. So just so we don't have that harsh edge when we define the brush, I'm just going to take the gradient tool and using the foreground to transparent gradient, and with the gradient set to black, I'm just going to draw a gradient in on that very layer. I'm just going to draw it in from each side so it fades that edge, so it's not abruptly stopping at the end of the document. I can even go ahead and fade these top ones if I want, just so we're not seeing that harsh edge there. Alright, so that's looking pretty good. Now I'm ready to define it as a brush. But in order to do that, when you define a brush in Photoshop, it's going to look at the darkest areas and define that as the most opaque areas of your brush. And white areas will actually be left transparent, while gray areas will have some, just a little bit of transparency. So if I were to define this image now as a brush, it will define the background and then leave a clear spot in the middle here. So we obviously need to invert the values before we go ahead and define it as a brush. So we'll go into the image menu again, go down here to Adjustments and choose Invert, or simply press Command or Control I, and it flips it around. Now we're ready to define this flare as a brush. So it's not necessary to go ahead and draw a selection around it because it's going to ignore the white area anyway. So we'll just go ahead and go under the Edit menu and go down here to Define Brush Preset. And we can give it a name. We'll call it Flare 1. And we'll go ahead and click OK. Now notice I've defined it enormous. It's almost the size of my document, which is pretty big. And I tend to go ahead and define brushes much bigger than I'm going to be using them for because it will retain some detail. If you define a brush very small, it's going to pick up those pixels, and if you try and enlarge it for whatever reason, it's going to show that pixelation even in the brush. So defining brushes as big as possible. I mean, you don't want to go enormous, but you want to go much bigger than you probably would normally. And it will give you and save a lot of that detail. So I'm going to click OK, and now my brush is defined. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new blank layer. And all I need to do to add this to my image is go ahead and select my brush tool, and I'm going to go over here into the brush menu. And it's going to be the very last brush that I created, which is right here. There it is. And you can see the outline of the brush. I'm actually going to use the bracket keys to size the brush down a little bit. And let's make sure we're painting with white. So I'm going to go ahead and set white as my foreground color. And now every time I dab, it adds a flare to my image. So I can just paint a whole row of them if I like. But in this case, in this context here, I'm merely just wanting to make my flashes on this camera a little bit more dramatic. So we'll just size it up and simply dab once or twice on each one of the camera flashes. And that will give that flash a little bit more drama. And notice if I double up, you can see those lines tend to get a little bit more dramatic. So it really depends on your preference. It can even change the size of the brush a little bit. And this is the advantage of it being a brush, is that they don't all have to be the same size. I can have, since this guy is kind of like in the midground, I'll make his flash a little bit, that size. This guy is a tad closer, so we'll just nudge that size up a little bit here and make that flare, and then we'll nudge this one way down since he's way in the far back here, and we'll make his flare just a little bit smaller. So the beauty of it, again, being a brush, we can size it right on the fly and apply it right where we need to at the correct size. Now, if I wanted to, now at this point, I would be done, and it looks pretty good. If you wanted to add a little bit more interest to this, you can add a outer glow layer style. And let's just kind of give it a little bit of a blue tinge to it. There we go. And I can increase that size, so we're getting a little bit more of a flare coming off there. Look at the difference without the glow and with it. So it adds a little bit more to that by simply adding an outer glow layer style to that lens flare brush to really bring out much more interesting. So you can see the before and after we started with looked pretty good, but by adding those flares, we can make it that much more interesting. And I've always got that brush saved so I can apply it to any image I want at any time.